Bomb threats, misinformation, and hundreds of millions of dollars paid to buy votes. Claims of Russian interference has overshadowed Moldova's EU referendum and presidential election in a bid to drive the country away from the West. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Moldova is a step closer to achieving EU membership after voting yes in its referendum. It was by a very narrow margin of 50.46% of the vote, amid accusations of the Kremlin trying to influence the people.
A nation caught in a tug-of-war between Brussels and Moscow, while tens of thousands of Moldovans lined up to decide the fate of their country. There came accusations of the Kremlin spreading disinformation and paying voters.
Moldova faced today and in recent months an unprecedented attack on freedom and democracy. Criminal groups together with foreign forces have attacked our country with tens of millions of euros, lies and propaganda.
Despite the alleged interference, the yes vote edged ahead.
We noted that this vote took place under unprecedented interference and intimidation by Russia and its proxies, aiming to destabilize the democratic processes in the Republic of Moldova.
Russia has denied the accusations and is calling on its president to prove election interference. Moldova was officially granted EU candidate status in June 2022 with a target of 2030 for accession. On the same day as the EU vote, the former Soviet state held presidential elections. No candidate secured a majority, but the incumbent president is leading the race with her opponent Alexander Stoyanoglu second. A second vote is scheduled for November 3. With pro-Russian parties likely to back Stoyanoglu, it could be a close contest. So, what next for this nation? Can it move fully away from Moscow's influence?
Well, earlier I spoke to Vladislav Kulminski. He's the former Deputy Prime Minister of Moldova, who spoke to me from the capital of the country, Chisinau. Give us your reading of what has happened in your country over the last few days. I mean, we're reading all these stories of Russian interference in the elections. Are these credible?
Yes, they are. Moldova is a small country on the outskirts of the former Soviet Union that is trying to make its way to the European Union. Russia, just like any empire, is quite reluctant to relinquish its control over the Republic of Moldova and is doing everything within its power to keep the Republic of Moldova within its orbit, like any empire, perhaps with the exception of the British Empire.
Are you angry? Does that make you feel upset that all this money seems to have been sloshing around a small country trying to buy votes?
There is no point in being angry. There's a point in being rational and achieving your goal. And that goal is Moldova's EU integration. That is the only way for the Republic of Moldova to keep peace, stability, and to have a credible development project, because Russia wants to keep the Republic of Moldova as part of so-called gray zone, essentially buffer area where geopolitical tug-of-war is the reality of the day.
How do young people in Moldova feel? Presumably, they're far more Western-leaning and interested in the European Union.
The country is very divided. The opinion in the country is very divided. The opportunity for Moldova to join the European Union came as a result of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, and this window of opportunity is likely to be very short. So there's really not that much time to prepare public opinion properly, and the country has been divided from its independence and remains divided until this day, even though moving towards the European Union and eventually joining the European Union is objectively in the country's very best interest. I will remind you that Moldova's only two neighbors are Ukraine, which is fighting off Russia's war of aggression designed to dismember Ukraine, like Poland was 3 times in its history, and Romania, which also perceives Russia's possible effort to expand its spheres of influence as a security threat. So for the Republic of Moldova to avoid the fate of gray areas, buffer zones where wars between great powers usually happen, the European Union is the only option.
And tell me, did you smile when you saw that Russia had spent or wasted $100 million and didn't succeed in what it was trying to achieve?
No, I did not smile because you can only smile once you are outside of the Republic of Moldova and looking at it somewhat impassionately. But once you're in it and once Russia's so-called benign administrations apply to your country, you cannot smile at this kind of stuff because this is serious, this is where it is happening, and they are trying to veer the Republic of Moldova off its European integration course. And they almost succeeded. I will remind you that the referendum on Moldova joining the European Union passed by the narrowest of margins possible, and it showed how divided the country is and how Russia's propaganda and Russia's efforts to buy votes still work in the former Soviet Union countries.
And Vladislav, just looking ahead to the presidential runoff now, do you think Maia Sandu will keep her position as president of Moldova?
That is the outcome that certainly pro-European forces in the country will be fighting for, but this is going to be a very close race. The outcome is far from certain.
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining me from Istanbul is Lucia Scripcari. She's a researcher of Moldovan political affairs. Here with me in the studio is Anna Matveeva. She's a senior visiting research fellow in the War Studies Department, that's at King's College in London. And Marko Gasic, he is a political analyst. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. I'll come to you first, Lucia. Just sum up what a wild few days this has been in Moldovan politics. I mean, we're reading allegations of bribery, vote rigging, vote buying, cyber warfare, hacks and leaks. The list goes on. I mean, the Russians have been busy.
Indeed, these elections showed actually clearly a textbook case of a divided nation, half of which voted for Moscow and half of it voted for the EU. Basically, the allegations regarding the voters being incentivized with, financial means shows, in fact, an investigation both from the prosecution and from investigating journalists that found out that in September money were fueled from Russian banks to Moldovan voters to vote for the pro-Russian candidates. And in this context, it is important to mention about the political figure that is located in Moscow at the moment, who is Ilan Shor, and who is believed to have orchestrated this scheme of incentivizing the voters. He himself is, in fact, accused of money embezzlement of Moldovan banks, and he's facing around 15 years of prison in Moldova. This is why he is currently located in Moscow. He has been before in Israel, and he's a very influential figure in Moldova, who, as a leader of political party called Shor, they incentivize, as I said, Moldovan voters both in the protests that happened before the elections in the past months, the protests against the current government and against Moldova's aspiration to join the EU.
Anna, everything we've seen in Moldova the last few days, President Sandu has described as an unprecedented assault on democracy. Would you agree with her reading of it?
I'm sorry, I wouldn't, because we have a lot of precedents when politicians who did not win their cause or who suffered significant setbacks, as in the case of Moldova, are blaming somebody else. Yeah, outside interference. Yeah, we had it in Brexit, we had it with the US elections, we had it in many post-Soviet countries. Ukraine, both sides, had been accusing each other of bribing the electorate. Kyrgyzstan, three revolutions started with that kind of accusations. But the problem is that first, it's very difficult to prove anything decisively. The second thing is that it is also hard to believe that large numbers of people, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, would just change their political preferences because of whatever money. I think what is quite significant here that we have a gap between how many people voted in presidential elections and how many people voted in the referendum, because quite a few people did not take the ballot papers to vote in the referendum, but they took a ballot paper to vote in presidential elections, saying that there is also some sense of a boycott vote.
So you're adamant you don't think there was Russian interference?
I would need to have real hard evidence to prove that it was something which could make a decisive effect. I would say that we should also look at our own society. We had Brexit. As Lucia just said, we have divided society in Britain.
Look how that's worked out. Not very well.
Yeah, so we also had a referendum about the EU. So let's think why people made this or that choice in Brexit. And I think that Moldovans may not be very different from us. They had reasons to have different positions.
Marko, what's your reading of the interference allegations then that Russia was bankrolling this whole scam effectively to keep Moldova out of going anywhere near the European Union?
Well, this is a very important story, a very big, important story, a very big, important and stupid story. Because if hundreds of thousands of people, let's say 130,000 people, a population, a total electorate of about 1 million that actually voted, had been sought by the Russians to vote on their behalf, you would have had to have hundreds of thousands of emails going out to those people or hundreds of thousands of conversations going to those people. There would be a payment trail of 130,000 bank accounts, or as President Sandu suggested, 300,000. We would see hundreds of thousands of those transactions going on. We've seen nothing presented. This story is one of those fly-by-night stories that comes in to disqualify the other side, and they've been doing a pretty good job, but there is, as Anna suggested, zero evidence for this claim, and so much obvious circumstantial evidence for the fundamental untruth of this big, stupid story.
There were reports of people being picked up at the airport with bags of cash coming in from Russia as well.
Yeah, but the main point, that's another one that you can't prove either way. Where are the bags of cash? Who are the people? However, the main point is that these have gone through into bank accounts. Therefore, people have been marketed to and been solicited for their vote. There has to be evidence of either a conversation with them or an email. Have you got hundreds of thousands of conversations going on in Moldova about changing your vote perhaps for $100? Well, if we'd have spotted that a mile off, or the government would have, and we'd have been hearing about it. We hear nothing about the way, the mechanism in which this transaction supposedly occurred. It's perfectly obvious the transaction didn't occur. This is a PR story designed to serve, I'm afraid, the Western purpose.
Lucia, we spoke earlier to your former Deputy Prime Minister, Vladislav Kulminski, and he said the Russian Empire doesn't want to let go of Moldova. Why is that?
I mean, in this context, it is important to mention about the former president, Dodon, who happened to be a pro-Russian, politician, and in the previous elections he had lost the elections. So seemingly, Russia realized there have been minimum efforts to keep this president in place, in comparison to the current president, who is a pro-EU, and as we've seen, the EU has been very active in coordinating the membership applications, for example, of Moldova, and had been perhaps more aggressive in getting the region of Moldova closer to its membership. So because Russia feels it's losing its sphere of influence, it tries to keep it due to two factors. One is the Transnistrian region, who, interestingly enough, in these elections voted more for the EU membership in comparison to the Gagauzian autonomous republic, who is also a pro-Russian, and voted actually, Transnistria voted more for Maia Sandu in comparison again to Gagauzia. Yeah, this is my interpretation.
Thanks, Lucia. Anna, it's clear Moldova is now at a crossroads. It either pivots west and joins the European Union, or it ends up being effectively a Soviet satellite again. Is that fair?
No, I don't think that is fair. And I also do not, I take the issue with the formulation of pro-Russian. I think, yes, there are some pro-Russian forces, but they are relatively few. The kind of quite a big bulk of Moldova's population, I would say, are pro-status quo people. They kind of are familiar with their situation. They hold this kind of bridge position, being both between Russia and the West. They would like to have benefits of both. They do not like to be dragged into geopolitical games which are nothing to do with Moldova. Moldova has consistently adhered to the position of neutrality. It's the most, all sociological polls say that this is the most popular position, and they do not want to lose a beneficial economic and social ties with Russia. That doesn't mean that they're against the EU. They also would like to cooperate with the West, with the European Union, but they also feel that European Union is pushing them towards one extreme, and they do not want to have either.
Marko, you're nodding in agreement, but a lot of people would say, if you're a young person in Moldova right now, the future is very much European, get into the EU, and you will have more opportunity.
If you join the EU as a young person, you'll have a choice between a menial job in the West or a military post in the East. And neither of those are going to please those young people at all. When they see the dismal reality of most people, most diaspora departures, and they go into other countries, Western countries, and what do they end up doing? Most of them end up doing something that they don't like doing and they would have never done in their own countries. But I would go back to the previous point. You see, as you positioned it, it's either a Soviet satellite or a Russian satellite, rather, or an EU or in the EU camp. And as we've heard, there is a middle position of neutrality, which is the one I would also advocate. I mean, once again, we find the West is polarizing a population into opposite camps so that they don't agree, so that the compromise that has kept them together does no longer work, so they end up in internal conflict. That one worked really well in Ukraine. It's worked really well, hasn't it? This effort to polarize the population
Marko,
of a previously stable country. It's ended in war there. It ended in war in Libya. It ended in war in Syria. How many more wars do they want by using the same polarizing tactic of other people's countries?
But ultimately, democracy is beautiful, and the people have had their say in Moldova, so they will now be pushing closer to the European Union.
You say that. I think this is not a democratic in any sense. What we've had...
They were given a vote.
They were given a vote. Well, that's very nice. So then they're supposed to give them a vote. They also gave them a ban on pro-Russian parties. They passed a law criminalizing so-called disinformation, which they admit doesn't even have to harm the state. Just if the government says you're guilty of disinformation, that's it. And anything pro-Russian, or even not even pro-Russian, anti a change, anything pro-status quo might be deemed as being worthy of a sentence. This is not democracy. We are now in a post-democratic world, increasingly run from the West, where all the things we believed in about democracy are being thrown away and thrown into the dustbin.
But they were given their say. They were given their say, and they have narrowly voted in favour of going towards the European Union. So that's a fact. Anna?
Just a little caveat to that. There is a Moldovan diaspora, labor migrants in Russia, about 500,000 people. And certainly they are not going to vote for the EU. The Moldovan government only opened 2 polling stations. Russia is a huge country. These 2 polling stations were both in Moscow. They had huge queues of people, and many people who tried to get in to vote, they didn't. And there were people in the streets. And of course, not every single Moldovan citizens can get to Moscow to vote if they are working in Vladivostok, for example. So there is also a kind of a sense that that part of electorate has been disfranchised. Moldova has opened many more polling stations in European countries, making it easier to vote for people who are sort of maybe on that side rather than who may be on the other side. But I have to say that this referendum did not need it to be held. The referendum was a choice. It was not a condition of the European Union saying that this is that you must have this referendum to affirm the European membership. That was the choice which President Sandu made. It did not really go
it's not legally binding.
Yes,
it's not legally binding. Let's bring Lucia back in. Lucia, give me your prediction where Moldova is heading then, 5-6 years' time from now. Do you see your country proudly joining the European Union?
It's a very interesting question because this is the aspiration, in fact, of the current president who aspires Moldova to become a member by 2030. And it seems a challenge because so many reforms have to be conducted. And these elections showed that there are many pessimists about the EU membership. So the EU and the pro-EU government has to demonstrate that indeed economic reform is about to happen, and as well as judicial reform, and again, the conflict in Transnistria, which has been an issue starting from 1992, has finally to come to an end. There has many solutions proposed before, but it's a frozen conflict. And with this frozen conflict, we cannot move forward. With this in mind, it will be very challenging to join very soon. The territorial conflict should be resolved, but it doesn't seem possible having in mind that now the war is happening and the two states who are in fact important at the negotiation table about this very region is Ukraine and Russia. So you have to bring these two nations at the table to discuss the Transnistrian conflict, which doesn't seem possible in the short run.
And Lucia, just tell me who's going to win the runoff then on November 3rd, President Sandu or Stoyanoglu?
In my opinion, having in my mind that Stoyanoglu has 26% at the moment, in my opinion, Sandu will win the elections. The only issue is at the current elections that we have seen is that not many people voted. So the absence of voters who are actually pro-EU is explained by the fact that the current government did not do enough effort to demonstrate the reforms that I have been just mentioning about. So I believe that Maya Sandu will win the elections.
Marko, if I was Vladimir Putin now and I was looking at this, if $100 million has been spent on this interference campaign.
Well, that's another one that's come from nowhere, but carry on.
Well, that's the reported figure.
No, that's the claim.
That's a waste of money, isn't it?
Total waste.
If Russia has spent this money on an interference campaign, they've got nothing back for it.
Let's put it this way. Let's get some context. If Russia had, and I don't believe it has, on the basis of what we've heard so far, it doesn't seem to have because it doesn't make sense. We compare it to the billions of dollars spent by the Western world in regime change operations in other countries. I mean, Victoria Nuland, the ex-Assistant Secretary of State, was proudly trumpeting $5 billion spent on undermining Ukrainian democracy, which is not what she called it. She called it promoting it, but effectively it meant regime change. So this $100 million, which is beyond the dreams of reality, as it were, is a complete, would be chicken feed compared to the Western investment. However, what we have is Western NGOs in all these countries protected, as it were, from their finances becoming visible. And then there are claims against the other side, where in this case the finances have no way, appear to have no way of arriving in their chosen destination. So really, we're talking money, but the real money is being spent by the West, and the West does it much better than anyone. Its finances are opaque, It puts you on the defensive if you're a country like Georgia, which doesn't want to have the opaque finance system. Anyone who wants Western financial investment in meddling is criticized. So if I was Vladimir Putin, I'd be putting a lot more money in than he apparently is.
Anna, just want to talk about Ukraine. Do you think the war in Ukraine really sharpened the focus of a lot of Moldovans sharing a border with Ukraine, knowing Ukrainian people?
Initially, yes, but there was also a sense that the best tactics which we can do to, which would be good for our country, is to be as neutral as possible and not to be dragged into a geopolitical game. Initially, of course, the war was met by shock and horror in Moldovan society, but there was also a sense that the Ukrainian refugees should not stay for very long. It's okay to welcome them for a bit, but the idea that they should move on, that was also there. But then Moldova benefited a lot from the outbreak of the war. It's this whole European membership kind of prospect came on board only because there was a war in Ukraine. Otherwise, Moldova probably would not get anywhere that far. Moldova has also received a lot of funding from the European Union and from the United States, lots of attention. Its profile has been raised. So it is, in my view, it's not such a divisive factor in society.
Anna, Marko and Lucia, thank you all so much for your contribution on this. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World, and if you like what you see there, please do hit subscribe. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.